Welcome back. You're with us here on Newsroom. Now, executive compensation being high has been, of course, making headlines across the world. Today, we focus on what role shareholders should play in deciding levels of executive pay. Grant Thornton India conducted a survey of 3,000 businesses and compiled a report. To discuss that, Sai Vekateshwaran, partner at Grant Thornton India, is joining us this evening. Sai, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks a lot.
To start off with, Sai, before we even get into the report, what I want to ask you is that at a time like this, when so many companies are facing difficult times, are CEOs or executive pays actually continuing to move up?
It may not always be moving up, but I think what shareholders want to see is a better correlation between performance and compensation. And I think what's happened of late is I think there's more awareness on the linkage or lack of linkage between performance of a company. So it could be in terms of profitability, and could be in terms of how the share price is doing versus the compensation that the CEO or the directors are getting. And I think that's what's leading to this whole debate. So
So is this across the board, or is it specific sectors? I mean, one of the very visible sectors that we see come under fire all the time is, of course, the banking space, and particularly a lot of the Wall Street bankers. And some of them, in fact, I think Barclays, perhaps, as we were just talking about, is one example, you know, where they've actually turned around and said, but it's performance linked, and I don't see why I should be apologetic about it.
Sure.
So if we are linking it to performance, then to what extent can shareholders really step in and say, that there is this maximum amount that I think is feasible?
Yeah. So I think, to answer your question, I don't think it's really very sector specific. And in most cases, I think what people are wanting is that better transparency in terms of that linkage with the performance. Now, when we say it's not just some sectors, like if you looked at recent reports in India, I think the proxy advisory firms have actually advised on a negative vote on a few CEO compensation proposals in India, and that's across various sectors. And similarly, if you even talk of the UK example, Barclays was just one, but there were others as well. Of course, I think majority were in the financial services sector.
Vikram Pandit was
absolutely. He was
high-profile example.
Absolutely. So, but it's.
I mean, if the key really here is to ensure accountability or transparency, then what more can be done to do that?
Sure. So, for instance, if you looked at the global changes that are happening, so the Dodd-Frank Act was introduced in the US last year, which now requires a kind of a vote on a say on pay vote, which is required at least once every 3 years. The UK has just unveiled a proposal which again requires a binding vote. The US is not a binding vote, it's only an advisory vote. The UK actually requires a binding vote. And the Indian company law, the companies bill, actually has some interesting proposals. Although it's not talking of active shareholder participation, but that's actually talking of much more active participation by the board of directors, the nomination and compensation committee, actually putting out more detailed policies on remuneration of directors and having detailed disclosures on how that links up with performance, what is the linkage of the variable elements within the pay to actual performance and the performance benchmarks, etc. And there's also an added disclosure that is being proposed on the linkage between, or the ratio between, director pay versus the median employee pay. So I think at least India has taken the right steps. I think putting in place a transparent policy into the director's report, which goes to all shareholders, and also I think these are added disclosures. So I think that is a step in the works. It's in the works. Yeah.
So you were talking about median pay as well. What are the inferences for managerial remuneration?
Well, it again varies from sector to sector. I think service sectors typically tend to have higher kind of median to director ratios. Manufacturing probably slightly lesser. But again, I think depends on the evolution of the company, again, how professionally managed, to whether it's more promoter run. So I think a lot of these factors in India, and India is slightly more unique as compared to the other global companies, because in India, majority of the public companies are still promoter run. So there will be some of those influences.
You know, just to sort of turn this around a little bit, but what do you make of those instances where a CEO or executive just turns around and preempts all of this by actually cutting down his own pay packet or offering to take that cut.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
how is that perceived by shareholders?
Well, I think perceived quite well. In fact, in India, this year itself, if you looked at some of the large company CEOs have actually taken a cut in their pay, and I think that's a step in the right direction, and I think sending a right signal to shareholders, saying that
they're all in this together.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Sai, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you with us.
And thank you.
That tells us the story really of